You can't make films in Unreal if you haven't mastered Sequencer. This is the timeline where you can add animations to characters, lights, and effects. Whether you're completely new to Unreal filmmaking or you just want to speed up your workflow, this is for you. To make it easy to get up and running inside of Sequencer and take everything I've learned from the last 8 years I worked as an artist and supervisor on Hollywood visual effects on movies like Star Wars 9, Fantastic Beasts, and Across the Spider-Verse. And I started using Unreal Engine as an on-set operator in virtual production on Netflix's Avatar: The Last Airbender. And when you use Unreal on set, you have to be ready to make any change at the last minute. And when the whole crew around you is waiting, you have to make those changes in seconds. That's why you have to be fast, nimble, and smarter inside of Sequencer. So I put together a list of 20 of my favorite Sequencer hotkeys and tips to make your workflows even faster inside of Sequencer. We're gonna move quick, so like this video so you can jump back to it later and stick around until the end, because I'll share my favorite tip on how to add slow motion or bullet time all inside of Sequencer. You're gonna wanna hear this. Let's jump right in to 20 of my favorite tips inside of Sequencer. So here I am in the project file for War of Being, and I'm gonna open up one of these level sequences, and let's start with the basics. So pressing play will play through your sequence. This thing in the middle is our time indicator that we can scrub along and decide our frame. A really important note for visual effects is you need to have this magnet icon enabled. D is the hotkey here, and this will snap your time indicator to a whole frame. If I zoom in here and I disable this magnet, you can see I can scrub in between our frames here, but this will add stuttering and jitteriness to your renders if you create keyframes in between any whole frames. So make sure that's enabled. The next hotkey to know is Jackal. So J, K, and L. J will reverse your timeline, K will pause it, and L will play it forward. So just remember Jackal, and if you don't want to use hotkeys, you can do the same thing with these buttons down here. We have play forward, play in reverse, and then we can step forward by 1 frame. You can also use your arrow keys to step forward by 1 frame, or you can press shift and then the left and right arrow keys to jump ahead or backwards by 5 frames. Now you can change the amount of frames that we jump forward here instead of 5 by going into your playback options and just changing this jump frame increment to something like 15. And now you can make much bigger jumps throughout your scene. Then if you want to snap back to the first frame in our output range, you can just press the up key and that will jump to the first frame. And the down key actually will just play back your sequence. So if you want to jump to that last frame, just press Control and the up key, and that'll snap to our last frame. I can right click in Sequencer to drag around up and down throughout the menu. I can press the minus key to zoom out or the plus key to zoom in. I can also control that with these little sliders here. Our green in and out points are our active frame range, so you can drag these around or press the left or right bracket key to move those in and out. And this is the frame range that Movie Render Queue will render by default. And if you just want to preview your active timeline, you can press the F key to frame up on your sequencer timeline, and that will make your in and out points be the center of your sequence. Now, the entire reason we're using Sequencer is to add animations and keyframes into our timeline here. So if you want to jump to any keyframe, just click on that keyframe and your time indicator will jump right to it. And if you just want to jump forward or backwards across our keyframes, it's really simple as well. Just select a track and then use the comma and period keys to jump forward and backwards between any keyframes. Now this example already has a lot of keyframes in it, so to keep it simple, let's set up a scene completely from scratch. So here we are in our graveyard sequence, and I've taken our 2 characters and we've imported them in the scene. So from here, all we'd have to do is right click in our content browser, go to cinematics and create a new level sequence. So now we have an empty level sequence. Now you'll also want to change over your frames per second here from 30 frames per second over to 24, which is the standard frame rate for movies. And the first thing to do is start to add our characters and cameras into Sequencer. So there's a couple ways we can do this. The first and easiest is just to drag that reference from the outliner into Sequencer and it'll automatically add it. The other way, I'll click on our other samurai, is to add this actor to Sequencer through the Add Track button. And this will do the same exact thing. And the last way, the hotkey that I try to use, is you have to select your object in the viewport and then press Control A. And you'll see that pops into our Sequencer here. And if this isn't working for you, just make sure you right click inside of Sequencer before pressing any hotkeys to make sure you're communicating with Sequencer. Now with characters, the first thing to do is to add in animation. So I'm gonna import our motion capture animation here. And now we can see our motion capture is imported. Now the next thing we wanna do is add in a camera and start keyframing the animations. So you need two things to render a camera out of Sequencer. One is a Cine camera and the other is a camera cut track. So there's two methods for that. The easiest by far is just to click on this create a new camera icon, and this will create a camera from your specific view. But you should also know it's easy to create custom hotkeys for any option inside of Sequencer to make that even faster. So let's make a hotkey for creating a new camera. If I go to Edit, Editor Preferences, I'm gonna type in camera and scroll down to the Sequencer hotkeys here, and you can see that the create camera currently doesn't have a hotkey. So one that I like to use so that I don't press it on accident is Control-Shift-Alt-C. I still like to use the C for the camera icon, but obviously with Control-C, it's a widely used hotkey. But now I can go around in the scene, find a nice spot, and just press Control-Shift-Alt-C, and it will create a new camera. Now this camera came in with this little lightning bolt icon, and that just means that this is a spawned actor, meaning if I close this level sequence, there's no camera inside of our 3D world. And now I can even search for a Cine camera and it won't show up. For cameras, I almost always convert these to possessable because I just want them to live inside of the scene. And now it'll exist regardless if I close Sequencer or not. Now this isn't a hotkey, but this is my most useful tip in terms of animating characters and cameras, and that's using a stage actor. I like to parent both my characters and my camera to the same parent actor. So I'll take my Cine camera actor and parent it to this empty actor, this mocap stage, and then we can start to rotate it around our scene. And you'll notice our composition stays exactly the same. By the way, if you want to download all of these hotkeys and more all in one place, you can get that for free when you sign up for Unreal Fundamentals. Start as a complete beginner in Unreal to making your own action scenes in just 30 minutes a day. Check it out at unrealforvfx.com/fundamentals. But the real power of Sequencer is animating different details of any actor inside of Sequencer. Now you'll notice by just looking through the camera options here that we have a couple little keyframe icons inside of the details panel. And this is by far the fastest way to add keyframes for things like focal length and aperture. Now we have these 3 keyframes set, and if I enable auto keyframe, this icon here, I can scrub later on and adjust something like the zoom, and it'll automatically animate between our 2 keyframes. But one thing that can be really confusing early on is that you don't see any of these add keyframes next to our location and rotation option. But obviously the most common thing to do is to animate the transform. So to create any property inside of Sequencer, we need to add a track. So for our Cine camera actor, let's add in a transform track. And this will give us location, rotation, and scale, and allow us to set 2 keyframes and animate between them. Now I can see that the animation's a little offset here, so I'm just gonna select all of these keyframes and then press Control and right arrow key, and that will just nudge these keyframes by 1 frame until I like the animation. Now I'm gonna delete this entire transform track here and show you the hotkey in this case. All you have to do is select your actor and press the S key. And we can see we've automatically created keyframes on our location and rotation settings. Now I've selected this actor, and if you look at the gizmo in the center of the frame here, I press the W, E, and R keys. That'll go from transform, rotation, and scale. By just adding the shift key to those same exact hotkeys, we can quickly create transform, rotation, and scale keyframes. And that's the fastest way to add those in. But a lot of times it's nice to look through the camera lens and adjust the composition intuitively. So to do that, all you have to do is click on this little pilot icon next to our Cine camera actor. The hotkey here is Shift P to pilot your camera. And we can see that we're piloting on the top left. And now we can pilot this around. And because we have auto keyframe enabled, this will automatically update and we can quickly change our animation. So that's piloting your camera, but the first track of any sequencer should be this camera cuts track. This is what Movie Render Queue will decide to render. And when you view this camera, instead of piloting it, which is Shift C for the hotkey, if you're viewing your camera cut, you can't adjust this camera at all. I'm right-clicking in the viewport, but I'm not able to actually change the transform. So when you're ready to lock down your camera, this is the best option, is don't pilot your camera, view the camera cut, and then you'll never have to worry about changing your animation. Another way to set this up is you can right-click on any actor and lock this actor, and you'll see that all of our tracks turn red, and this means that we can't adjust any keyframes inside of Sequencer. Just make sure to right-click and unlock it when you want to make any changes. You can also pin any actor to the top of Sequencer, so now I'll always have this Cine camera actor at the top of our sequence. So if you only want to adjust one thing, and oftentimes that will be the camera, you can just pin it to the top of Sequencer. But I can't stress enough that you can really animate any property inside of Sequencer, even down to the materials. So what if I wanted to change the color or intensity of our gold samurai's eyes here? Well, that exists in this element 0 material. Well, we could adjust that in this first material here by changing the emissive strength brighter or lower. By setting it to 0, it turns off. But what if I only wanted to change it inside of this one shot and not for our entire project file? Well, I can't drag this emissive strength into Sequencer, but I can keep adding in tracks until I can find this emissive strength. So let's go to add a track. And here we can see this skeletal mesh component. Now, if I look on the right side of our details panel, we can see that it's the skeletal mesh component is inside of this actor that has all of these details underneath it. So we need to add in this skeletal mesh component track in order to animate anything inside of here. Once this is added, we can add another track to adjust the material parameters of any one of our materials. So let's select element 0 and add a parameter here, and now we can easily find that emissive strength, and it'll automatically create a keyframe. So now if I set this to 0, you can see that it updates inside of Sequencer. But again, when I close Sequencer and I look back at our yellow samurai, you can see that his eyes have returned to normal. So if you're not finding the property that you want to animate, keep diving into the tracks and go deeper and deeper into this hierarchy inside of your details panel to find what you're looking for. Another thing you should know about is the camera preview. I personally like to disable this, but people have different preferences. So if you go to the editor preferences and type in camera preview, I'll toggle back on preview selected camera, and this will give us an additional viewport that we can pin at any time. Let me change this down to a size of 3 and minimize this window. And how this works is you'll just press on this little pin icon, and now you'll have this little preview window docked to the side of your viewport at any time. And this can make it easier to adjust your scene while still previewing your camera. All you have to do is unpin this preview, and as soon as you select anything else in your scene, that preview will go away. Now, I tend to always just use the Shift-C hotkey to view the camera cut, but use whatever is easier. Now, if you ever want to hide the details of any object in Sequencer, just select it and press the V key, and that will hide everything below it. Or if you want to expand any detail that can be keyframed, press Shift V to reveal it, and that will show you every single object and expand any of these hidden dropdowns. Now, as soon as you start to add a lot of things in, your Sequencer can get pretty messy. So to organize it, you can just press Control F to search for anything inside of Sequencer. I'm just going to search for the samurai. And now I can select both of these and press Control G. This will create a new folder and add these actors into that folder. So now I can just rename this as characters. And now it's really easy to hide these or show them whenever they're needed. Oftentimes, I'll make anywhere from 20 to 40 cameras for a single shot. So when I find something I'm happy with, I'll take all of the old cameras and throw them into a folder so they still exist, but they're hidden from the rest of Sequencer. Now, if you have character animation and you want to modify it further inside of Sequencer, you have two options for that. You can either edit this with an FK control rig. Now, this will not give you the controls you're probably looking for if you have a humanoid character, but this will convert your skeleton into an FK control rig so you can modify any bone. But the way we did this on War of Being was we created control rigs for all of our characters so we could bake our animation onto this control rig that makes it very easy for us to go back and add any modifications to certain keyframes. But in this case, we have an IK rig, so our hands and feet will stay in the same exact place, but we can still move around the rest of the body. Now you can also add in additive tracks So you don't have to modify every single keyframe. You can just identify a single bone that you want to adjust, like these hips. So as an example, I'll just tilt him over to do something really obvious and awkward and just create a simple keyframe. And now for the entire rest of the animation, we'll have that offset. But you can do this for the hands, feet, or anything else inside of your scene to make quick adjustments to your animation. Lastly, let's talk about slow motion and how to add bullet time all inside of Sequencer. Now, if you want to stretch and squash or just retime your keyframes, you have a couple options here which make it pretty easy. The first, if I want to change these transform keyframes, would be to grab this gray track at the top of any property that's keyframed, and you can simply drag these in and out points, and you'll see that they scale and retime correctly. But let's say you just wanted to retime the end and not the entire sequence. That could get a little tricky, but they built a tool for that as well. If you press Control M, you'll get this hidden transform menu here, and this will let you offset your keyframes forwards or backwards by 10 units. Or you can make this twice as long, or you could divide these by 2 so they'll go twice as fast. So you can quickly double or half any amount of keyframe animation. But with this transform menu, you just select the keyframes you want so you don't affect your entire frame range. But in my opinion, the best way to add slow motion is to create a time dilation track. Just look through this drop down here and add it into your scene. And this will give us a time multiplier we can apply across our entire world. So if I set this down to something really low, like 0.25, you'll see that even the birds and the animated water texture on our ground are all moving at 1/4 the speed of our original scene. So this is the most universal way to apply this to your scene. And when I play back our sequence, you'll see that our actors are also moving in slow motion. You can even animate these so I can start slow and get faster at the end. So you have a lot of control once you add in this time dilation track. And lastly, I think a lot of beginners can be confused by the rendering process inside of Unreal, and I totally get it. This was definitely the hardest thing to comprehend at the very beginning. But the real important thing that you have to know, which will hopefully demystify this entire thing, is that whenever you go to render local out of movie render queue, what happens is our game starts to play and our physics begin to simulate. Now, this can be very confusing because we're not really playing a video game inside of Unreal Engine. We really just want to play back Sequencer, but we can't preview our final render because this is not through our camera. But even if we did and look through our camera cut here, we could start on the first frame. But the timing is not exact here, it's not correct, and our render would actually look slightly different than what we're seeing here. So how can we fix that? Well, the way to preview your render exactly inside of your viewport is actually really simple. So let's browse to our level sequence here. All we have to do is click and drag this level sequence and add it into our scene. Now, this is an actor just like anything else, just like our camera or our particles or our lights. They're just actors inside of the scene. And all we have to do is set this to autoplay. And I'll set the loop to loop indefinitely. Now, the next time that we go to press play, we'll automatically snap into this level sequence and we'll be able to preview exactly what we'll see out of movie render queue. Now, if something's not looking right at this stage, you should expect it to not look right in your final render. So go back and make any adjustments at this stage here. And to swap this out for another level sequence, all you have to do is either drag that other level sequence in, or you can select any other level sequence from this drop down. And from here, you can use the hotkey Alt-P to play your game, or you can also simulate your game, which is playing your game without controlling a pawn. And now when you simulate, your level sequence will play back, but you won't be looking through the camera. So you can view your 3D scene from an outside perspective. So you can press Alt-S to simulate your game. You can press Escape to stop game mode, or you can go back and play your selected viewport here. And if you ever want to get your mouse cursor back, you can press Shift and F1, and now you can select anything inside of your scene and start making adjustments while your game is playing. Now, this took me just a couple seconds to explain, but honestly, it took me months to learn how this entire system works together. So leave a like down below if you learned something new. Now, did you know you can master all the skills to make your own films inside of Unreal 5 and be job ready in just 21 days? And no, you don't need to know how to model, how to animate, or how to code. You can go from a complete beginner to creating Hollywood-level visuals in just 30 minutes a day. We've helped complete beginners and industry pros just like you learn the skills to be job ready at visual effects and virtual production studios. All you have to do is go to unrealforvfx.com/fundamentals. I've taken every lesson, every template, and every cheat sheet that I use on my own commercial projects, and I'm giving them away for free when you join Unreal Fundamentals. This is filmmaker-focused training so you can create your own action scenes entirely in Unreal 5. These are battle-tested on real-world productions, and I'm giving all of my best secrets away. So sign up today at unrealforvfx.com/fundamentals. Grab it on sale before the end of this week. And make sure to subscribe if you want to see more Unreal visual effects and filmmaking videos just like this. And you can check out this playlist of all of the Unreal 5 tutorials I've already made so far. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.